What's up, guys? My name's Brandon, and welcome back to Apple Weekly. In this episode, we're going to be discussing even more new features in iOS 26.1 beta. We're going to talk about the multiple new Apple products that just got announced this week, good news about the iPhone Fold and the Apple Glasses, what to expect from the next AirPods, a crazy AirTag story, and more. All right, so let's start with what happened this week. So this week, we did see Apple release iOS 26.1 Beta 3 for developers and for public beta testers, and it wasn't quite as big of an update as the previous couple of betas, but we did get a few changes here in the software. So first off, we do have an icon change, an app icon change for the Apple TV application, along with a full rebranding for Apple TV, because just this week, Apple did announce a full rebrand from Apple TV Plus to just Apple TV. And they kind of announced this along with the announcement of F1 the movie coming to Apple TV on Friday, December 12th, which is going to be a big deal. And they announced this at the end of a press release earlier this week. So they said Apple TV Plus is now simply Apple TV with a vibrant new identity. I think most people already called it Apple TV anyways instead of Apple TV Plus, but this kind of just makes it a little bit simpler to understand what we're talking about here. So that was one of the big changes with Beta 3. We do also see a new section inside of our settings. So if we go into our settings and go to General, we now have a section for local capture. And you can see that inside of this section, it shows your save location. So you can change the save location where these recordings save to, and you have the toggle for recording audio only and not just video and audio. So before, you could only access this from that control center toggle that we had in the control center, but now there's a standalone setting for local capture, which was kind of a hidden feature, honestly, before this change. It's a little bit more obvious that it exists now. Also in Beta 3, we have a slight tweak to the slide to stop slider. So Beta 2 introduced the new slide to stop slider for a timer. So you can't just tap it to end the timer. You have to slide it now, which is kind of reminiscent of the slide to unlock days, but there's a slight tweak to this now because it's now slightly wider than it was before. So it's easier to kind of access and slide over than it was in Beta 2. Also, if we head into the control center, you'll notice that the control center toggles and just the control center in general is a bit more bouncy now. So it's a little bit more alive and fun because the application icons or the control icons right there kind of just bounce a little bit more than they did beforehand. Now we also see a few changes in the code for iOS 26.1 Beta 3 that are pretty interesting. So we see this from Aaron P613 on Twitter, and he mentioned a few things here. So first off, we now have notification forwarding. This is an upcoming feature that's going to allow you to see your notifications on your iPhone on a third-party accessory. So this is mentioned here inside of the code of this version. We did also see code linking to third-party AI integration coming soon. And we can tell this because Apple replaced report a concern related to ChatGPT to report a concern related to a third party. And there might be a new wallpaper coming with iOS 26.1 as well, because this was referenced in the code along with a description of what this wallpaper is going to look like. And if you throw this into Grok or ChatGPT, you can see what a wallpaper based on that, description will look like. Of course, Apple's will look a bit different than these AI generated ones, but we can expect that to come in 26.1 as well. Or it could just be related to a new product coming out from Apple, and this is maybe the default wallpaper for that product. We'll see. We also saw a new product hinted at in the macOS 26.1 betas, because this hinted at an upcoming Pro Display XDR2 with a center stage camera. Apple seems to be adding center stage to everything these days, so we should be seeing that with the next Pro Display XDR whenever that ends up coming out, but it is referenced in the latest macOS beta. Now switching back over to iOS, we also might be seeing a new public software release as early as next week, because we're hearing from Mac rumors that an iOS 26.0.2 update is in the works and should be getting released relatively soon. So I mentioned this a little while ago that it is a possibility to see a 26.0.2, but we don't know exactly what's going to be included in this update. It's just going to be bug fixes and security patches, but we don't know the specific ones that it's going to address. So this should be coming next week if I had to guess. We will talk more about release dates a little bit later in this video, but just know that a 26.0.2 could be coming very soon. Also this week, Apple quietly discontinued their Clips applications. If you remember a while back, Apple introduced a kind of video editing application called Clips, and I don't know a single person who used it. And just this week, they finally discontinued that application. It was a free app, but nobody used it. So Apple did discontinue Clips. If you're somebody who actually used it, please let me know in a comment down below, because I've never seen anybody use it before. And before we talk about the new products that Apple just announced, I do also want to touch on the performance and the battery life here with iOS 26.1 Beta 3, because I have been running this on my main device, which right now is still the iPhone Air. And I have actually noticed finally with Beta 3 that battery life is actually a little bit better than it was on iOS 26.0, which is kind of surprising scheduling for a beta. And I did not notice this with betas 1 or beta 2. So it looks like we are potentially seeing a slightly better battery life here with this third beta. If you're having a similar experience, let me know in a comment down below. It's not a significant difference, but since I use this phone every day, especially the Air, because it runs out of battery much quicker than I would like, I do notice when there's any type of improvement. Now, as far as performance goes, I've not really been able to tell a big difference in performance. My iPhone Air still gets quite a bit of heat up top on these betas, and it was like that on 26.0 as well. But as far as overall performance, not really a big change to me so far with 26.1 betas 1 through 3. I haven't really been able to tell a difference over iOS 26.0. So hopefully we will see that, but I've not been able to tell a big difference just yet. But if you're having a different experience, feel free to let me know down in the comments below. Now let's go ahead and talk about what to expect next from Apple, because next up, we're most likely going to see iOS 26.1, either beta 4, or we could even see the RC next week on October 20th. That is a Monday. Apple has been sticking to these Mondays lately. So we could be seeing beta 4 or RC. If we do see the RC next week, we should be seeing the final release on Monday, October 27th. If we get beta 4, we should see RC on October 27th and maybe the final release on November 3rd. So it's going to be one of those two scenarios, and that will be when we see iOS 26.1. Now, as far as iOS 26.0.2, like I mentioned earlier, I would guess that we're going to see that next week. It's pretty much going to have to be next week. Otherwise, we're going to run into a very close scenario, a really close scheduling for 26.0.2 and 26.1. So I would think that we would see that next week, most likely in the early half of next week. So either the 20th through the 22nd, I would say is the most likely to see iOS 26.0.2. And once again, that will be a public official release. That will not be a beta. So if you are on 26.1, you will not be receiving that update because that is lower than the version you are currently on. And then of course, after we get iOS 26.1, the final official release, we will start up with the 26.2 betas, which typically the 0.2 updates are bigger than the 26.1 updates or the 0.1 updates. So typically every year, the 0.2 and the 0.4 updates are the major updates. So if you're thinking we're not seeing a lot with 26.1, just prepare yourselves for 26.2 because we should be seeing a lot more features. Now let's go ahead and talk about the new products that Apple just announced this week, because we saw multiple new products. So first off, Apple announced an M5 iPad Pro. So this is going to have the M5 chip with up to a 10-core CPU. It's going to have the N1 chip. This is that new Apple designed wireless networking chip that's going to have Wi-Fi 7, Bluetooth 6, and Thread support. We're also going to get the C1X modem inside for the cellular versions of the iPad Pro, and that's going to get you up to 50% faster cellular data performance over the previous model. We also have 150 gigs of unified memory bandwidth, which is basically a 30% increase compared to M4. That's pretty substantial. So this is also going to have 2 times faster storage, read and write speeds, and also the 256 and 512 models are going to start with 12 gigs of RAM. So now the starting RAM is 12 gigs, which is pretty strong. And it's the same price as the M4 iPad Pro as well. Now, Apple did also announce the M5 MacBook Pro 14-inch. So just the 14-inch model. And Apple says that the M5 chip on this MacBook Pro is going to be up to 15% faster in terms of CPU and 45% faster in terms of graphics. So it does have the 10-core GPU, and it does have a neural accelerator in each one of those cores. So it is going to deliver up to 3.5 times faster AI performance. And I think this is the most important one. We have 2 times faster SSD performance and up to 4 terabytes of storage. So double the SSD speeds is a big deal. So I'm really excited to see that, along with a 4 terabyte option if you're somebody who needs to go all out with their MacBook Pro. Now, interestingly, the MacBook Pro, the M5 MacBook Pro, does not include a charger in the box if you live in Europe. And then we also saw Apple announce the M5 Vision Pro. So yes, we finally get a spec bump for the Vision Pro, and this has that M5 with 16 gigs of RAM still, but it is going to have faster performance and longer battery life. Apple didn't really say how much faster it's going to be, but they did say that the battery life is going to be 3 hours for video playback per charge compared to, I think it was 2.5 hours before. So a slight jump there. We do also finally have hardware accelerated ray tracing and mesh shading for the first time on the Vision Pro because of the M5 chip. So that will be better for gaming and just rendering graphics as well. So that should actually see a pretty big jump with this new model. It's also going to have 120 hertz refresh rate. So before it was 100 hertz. So Apple says that the 120 hertz support will reduce motion blur and provide a smoother experience when using Mac Virtual Display, which to me is my most used application, my most used feature with the Vision Pro. So this is going to be a pretty big upgrade for me personally. And it does also come with a new and improved dual nip band, which is supposed to be a bit more comfortable than the original. Now, interestingly, this is going to be the same price as before. So it's still the $3,500 despite, Samsung announcing theirs as being much cheaper, at least rumored to be much cheaper than, Apple's. So that's interesting to see the $3,500 price tag remaining. And also what's more interesting is that Apple is not allowing you to trade in the original Vision Pro for the new Vision Pro. So no trade-in deals, no trade-ins whatsoever for the original Vision Pro, which is kind of disappointing, to be honest, because if you try to sell it online, good luck. You're going to lose more than half of the value, most likely. Anyways, all these products are available to pre-order now, and they will be available for purchase on October 22nd. Now let's move on to some more Apple news, because we also got an update about the next generation of MacBook Pro that could be coming as early as next year. So we're hearing this from Mark Gurman, and this could be having an OLED touchscreen. So he said that Apple's working on a new version of the MacBook Pro with an OLED display, a hole punch camera, and touchscreen functionality. And he says that this new MacBook Pro is set to launch sometime between late next year or early 2027. So regardless of when it comes, that's still pretty soon for a pretty massive change to the MacBook Pro, or really the whole MacBook line. So I'm pretty excited to see how that turns out. Now we also got a glimpse into the future of the AirPods, because Mark Gurman also had a report mentioning the AirPods Pro, AirPods 5, and the H3 chip. So he said, with the AirPods Pro 3 out the door, Apple has already turned its development attention to another new version of its high-end in-ear buds. So Apple Silicon Group is working on an H3 chip designed for less lag time and better audio quality. They're already developing the AirPods 5, but I don't anticipate Apple bringing the heart rate sensor down to this line. But the company is looking to add several more health features to the AirPods over time, including a temperature reader. But still, the bigger deal is turning them into AI devices. And he says in that vein, it's been exploring the idea of embedding cameras in the device. So we've heard this for quite some time now. This has been rumored for a while from Gurman and others. We are going to see those cameras in the AirPods at some point in the very near future at this point. And speaking of AI, we have some pretty bad news when it comes to Apple and AI, because, well, stop me if you've heard this before, but Apple just lost more talent to Meta. So we've been hearing this for quite some time now, several months. Apple has lost a lot of their top AI talent to Meta. Mark Zuckerberg is kind of poaching everybody from Apple, with big numbers and getting them to come over to Meta. But this one is a big one. So this week we lost a pretty big one with Qi Yang. So he was recently appointed to lead Apple's AI-driven web search effort. So he was a senior exec, and basically Apple has really been working on this web search product, and they just lost their main guy for it. And if you remember, Yang was just promoted to the head of the AKI team, the Answers, Knowledge, and Information team. And they're the ones who have been trying to make Siri more like ChatGPT. So this is obviously the Siri that we all want, but it seems like Apple keeps, losing the talent to Meta. So this may end up being delayed even further. Hopefully not. Hopefully we see that ChatGPT-like Siri at some point, but it's not looking great again here with Apple losing talent. But let's move on to some more positive news, because we have some new information about Apple's iPhone Fold and the Apple glasses, both of which are positive, because we're now hearing, according to Ming-Chi Kuo, that the foldable iPhone might be cheaper than we expected. And he says this is because the hinge that's designed for Apple's foldable iPhone is expected to carry an average selling price of approximately $70 to $80 when mass production begins, which is well below the market expectation of $100 to $120 or even higher. And he says that the cost decline is not necessarily due to cheaper materials, but it's due to assembly design optimization and Foxconn's influence in production scaling. So if we're talking about a maybe $50 difference in terms of cost for Apple for this device, that could get it down to less than $2,000. I know a lot of people are saying the iPhone Fold is going to be like $2,500 to $3,000, kind of like Vision Pro range, not quite, but over $2,000. I could see this potentially now being under $2,000, maybe $1,999 or something like that. So it could still be more, but at least we're hearing good news about the costs getting lower. And we do also have good news regarding the Apple glasses, but it's not necessarily about them being cheaper. But we are hearing good news, because we're hearing that they may feature an in-lens display with 2 different modes. So this actually comes from Mark Gurman. He said this in a recent report. So he says the smart glasses are also likely to run the Vision Pro's operating system, Vision OS. So all the work on that software isn't going to waste because it's just on the Vision Pro. A future device could operate the full version of the OS when it's paired with a Mac and then switch to a lighter, more mobile-friendly interface when it's linked to an iPhone. So that is interesting. So if you have the glasses on your face, think the Meta glasses, like the Meta Ray-Bans, that's what the Apple glasses are going to look like. Pretty similar, probably a little bit more thin, but they are going to be a similar shape. They're going to be actual glasses. So when you're connected to your computer, it's going to run Vision OS, like the Vision OS software where you can move things like that. But when you're on your iPhone, it's probably going to be more like an actual iPhone in the screen that you see, with the glasses on. So it's going to change based on what you're connected to, which is pretty cool. And this next story is not necessarily news, but it's something I just wanted to mention because I thought it was pretty cool, especially if you are like an Apple collector out there. So we're now hearing that Steve Jobs is going to be featured on the US commemorative $1 coin in 2026. And this was just previewed today, so you can see the design for this coin, and you can see it says "Make something wonderful," and it says Steve Jobs, California, along with United States of America. It looks really cool. He's wearing that, famous turtleneck and jeans and sneakers, and it says that right there. And this is a gold coin. This will launch in 2026. It looks like it's going to be available for $13.25 or in a set of 4 for $27.50. And then finally, just as tradition, we have another crazy AirTag story. So this time, a couple in Florida was just getting home one evening. They were pulling into their driveway just like any other night, but what they didn't know was that they were being followed. So after they pulled into the driveway and they started getting out of their SUV, 2 men suddenly ran up, one on each side of the vehicle, and within seconds, the couple were pulled out of the car and forced into their garage at gunpoint. And before they could even react, they were inside their own home with guns pointed at them. But then their home alarm system went off, and since the suspects did not know the code, they just simply ran off. So once the couple realized what just happened, they called police immediately, and when they arrived, they started to look for any type of clue that could explain how these men knew where to find these people at that exact time. And what they found, during that investigation was an AirTag that was carefully taped underneath of their SUV. So it turns out the suspects taped this AirTag beneath the car earlier in the day, and then they waited and followed the couple all the way home to rob them. And thankfully these people had cameras at their house. They had security cameras, and they were able to capture all of this on video. And it turns out that the police, it took them a couple weeks, but they finally arrested the men in Tampa, and they were charged with several charges. So like armed burglary, armed kidnapping, robbery with a firearm, false imprisonment, and more. So thank God for that home alarm system, but this is kind of a case of an AirTag being used for bad, but you could also learn something from this. We could also learn something from this, and that is to always be aware of the alerts that you see on your phone. Always check your phone when you get in your car, when you start moving, just so you make sure that you don't see the unknown AirTag following you or unknown AirTag tracking you. Make sure you don't see that notification on your device because this could happen to you. If they would have just checked their phone, they would have seen that notification of an unknown AirTag following them, and they could have avoided this whole situation. So just be aware of that and just know that that is something you should look out for at all times. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Apple Weekly. If you did, give it a thumbs up. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below about iOS 26.1, the new Apple products, any of your thoughts down there. Always love reading those. But anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.